Hello, everybody, and welcome to our final session of the morning before lunch. Up next, we have Nicholas Lees and Bonnie Grace. We're just in the last bit of tech setup here, so we get the best camera angles possible. Can I please ask you to make sure that your phones are on silent? I've just been distracted by a really cute dog up there. No trick questions, dog. And if you can make sure your phones are on silent. And also, we've just had a request that it's some people struggle with hearing in this auditorium, so if you can keep the chat to a minimum in the demo so people can hear what the demonstrators are saying, that would be very much appreciated. And I think we're ready to start. So I'm just going to ask each of the demonstrators what they're going to do in the session, and then we'll kick off. So Bonnie, what are you hoping to get done in the next 45 minutes?
I am hoping to make one of my jugs, my slab jugs. I've actually named all my jugs with B names because I start with a B, so I'm actually making a Bonnie jug. Very apt. I would be a lot of drying and panicking when things get stuck together, but by the end I should have a jug to show you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Nick, what are you going to be doing in the next 45 minutes?
I'm going to be turning this thrown leather-hard porcelain form on the lathe, and I'll get about halfway through it. This I did earlier this morning, and it took me an hour and a half to get from there to there. So we're going to try and get as far as we can between here and here.
And that is
45
porcelain,
minutes.
not plaster, just because he's working on a plaster lathe. I think people might assume it's
plaster.
plaster.
This is plaster.
That's plaster.
This is porcelain.
That's porcelain. And just so you know, he would ordinarily be wearing a mask doing this, but we have done a safety check and we've got water and things like that. So for ease of communication, he's not wearing a mask for this demo, but he would normally be wearing a mask. So don't do this at home without a mask, is what I'm saying. So off you go, far away. And both are happy to take questions from the audience. So if you've got any questions, just pop your hand up. Give me a second to repeat the question so everybody in the audience can hear it, and it gives them time to formulate an answer, and then we can carry on from there. Great.
So that is just wedged, kind of finger tight, onto the porcelain chuck, a plaster chuck rather, which I've prepared with the diameters exactly matching the internal diameters of those two rings there.
And I'm going to ask the first question. I think it's burning on everybody's mind, as it would be mine. How thick is it thrown? What's the thickness of the clay?
It's a thick thrown. It's like really bad throwing. So in the middle here, this is probably 4 or 5 centimeters thick. It's exactly what you learn not to do when you're learning to throw. But as we know, all rules are there to be broken.
And how long, I know another question burning everybody's mind before you start, how long does it take you to dry that, to be able to turn it?
When I've thrown them, I leave them out for some days to dry to a nice leather hard on the outside, so I can just put a thumbprint in that. But
so it's leather hard, not greenware.
But it's also quite hard to the feel. Then I wrap it up and leave it for two or 3 weeks or so. So it's a very even consistency. It has to be an absolutely even consistency all the way through.
Everybody always wants to know what clay you use.
Is that me?
Ooh.
It's Parian.
Parian porcelain.
Parian porcelain, sort of pseudo porcelain, developed in early 19th century in Stoke-on-Trent to imitate marble from Paros in Greece for the Georgian nouveau riche to have faux classical ornaments in their houses.
And for your hand building,
I can't actually remember what I'm using today, but normally I'm using, as long as it fires white and it's stoneware, that's what I like to use. And if it's the extra smooth stuff, I can cheat and not wedge it beforehand. So it's nice and smooth. And
the essential thing is a white.
Yeah, as long as when it bisques, it's pure white, but when it gets to glaze, it goes slightly off white, but the whiter, the better, yeah. Being quite boring for a bit.
So what I'm doing here, is that okay if I just talk? What I'm doing here is just turning the external profile that I want for the form.
And what's the Parian like to throw? Is it advantageous to throw it really thick?
It's sort of like floppy jelly, really. It's horrible.
Floppy jelly.
Which is why I don't do proper throwing with it.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's not a particularly easy body to throw. It's quite it's reasonably plastic, but it's not got much structure to it, so it doesn't sort of hold the form very well.
Did you sort your wobble out on the lathe?
Sorry, I missed.
Did you sort the wobble out on the lathe?
Yes. We've sorted out the bearings on the lathe, yes. There's a bit of wobble in the floor, but I can't do anything about that. It's a sprung floor, I think we'll say.
Okay, so the question was, Nick, how do you get the plaster chuck onto the metal?
Oh, that's cast, so I basically cottle up. I have this, there's a metal spindle going up there, cottled up actually with a bit of old plastic piping, you know, like drain pipe, with a slot cut down it, taped up, plaster in the top. And I work in batches of these forms. I mean, this particular size, I tend to be components of a final piece of work, which is a group of objects as one piece of work, turned to millimeter matching dimensions. And they've all got slightly varying interior diameters of the foot ring and the neck. And I start with the widest one first and work my way through, and I can just turn the plaster chuck down and down and down as I get to the smaller pieces.
Do you put a base on the pots?
No, they don't hold water. It's because they're not really pots.
Bonnie, why do you use the needle first and then the knife after to cut through your shapes?
I actually think it came from when I was doing a lot of printmaking, kind of cutting paper and woodwork to mark once and then cut. If I'm doing it from the template itself, I sometimes kind of go a bit crazy and go in a bit more. So this is just like a pencil, basically, before you use scissors, just to make sure that I've got the correct shape and it's not a bit fatter on the other side than it is on one.
Is this one of those mud tools?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a knife on one side, and then it's very cool. My pin goes in and out. I feel very cool when I flick that out. But,
I've
yeah.
heard mud tools were designed by women, for women, and hence they've got all these wonderful colors and color-coded hardnesses and things.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Really clever stuff.
Nick, a question for you. How high do you fire your pieces?
How high?
How-
12, 20, around about. I sort of keep tinkering with it. Yeah, about that. The maturing temperature of the body, you know, what it says on the label is 1220 to 1240. And I'm just getting it to the point where it's vitrified enough. But if I go 5 or 10 degrees higher, all these fins just sag, and you don't get the vision into the interior of the form.
Oh, it is because the Parian maturing temperature is 1220 to 1240. Yeah. So it's lower than your standard porcelain.
Yes, I'm just on the low end of the vitrification of the body. This, what I'm doing now, is the only bit of measuring, and I'm just marking out where I'm going to make the first cut at 5mm intervals along the piece. And then after that, it's all done by eye.
Okay, why Parian and not another porcelain?
When I first did this, I did use a number of different porcelains. I've done this with bone china as well, it's got a different whiteness. Essentially because it's designed not to be glazed. So it's a body that's composed to be slightly self-glazing and have a lovely surface finish without a glaze applied to it. And you can't apply a glaze to that surface. Or you could try. I've never tried. I've not even tried. There's a lot of stupid things I have tried, and that's not one of them. Right, so now we're starting to cut in.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't know why I start at the centre and work to the outside.
And you're keeping that straight on.
This is straight, so I'm going straight in, and what you'll see me do next, I'll go straight in a bit, and then I will come and I'll do each side of each cup, and then I'll go straight in again. So they get into a kind of rhythm of working, where probably to get to the finished form, there might be, I've never counted actually, but I might be going along the form maybe 30 or 40 times, repeating an action. So what I put it.
Can you tell a little bit about your tools?
So yeah, this is, when I first turned porcelain like this, I was at the Royal College of Art, and I went upstairs to the metal workshop with a cheap metal steel chisel and ground a V shape out of it to do this on grinders there, and then found that I was spending more time resharpening that tool than I was turning. So, because soft porcelain is harder than steel, because the crystals in the porcelain are harder than steel, and it's only soft because of the water matrix. So this is I don't know if you can see this is tungsten carbide edge, sintered onto steel with a high-tech hazel handle.
Ergonomic.
Yeah. When I basically, some nice guys in Stoke made the tool for me, and they made it with quite a short handle. I didn't know what I wanted to handle. They made a short handle, and I used it. And I got really bad tennis elbow. So then I was like, I just needed a longer handle, so I wasn't having to hold so much tension in my arm there. So I do a bit of coppicing as well.
Ah, a very bespoke
It's
tool.
the kind of, the therapy for this thing.
Lovely question. Okay, the question is, Nick, when did you first conceive of this idea, and when did you realize how magical it could be?
Oh, that's a good question. So I first conceived of it, I was, I'll talk about this more in the lecture this afternoon, but I was doing a research project at the Royal College of Art for an MPhil in 2000, and I was looking at relationships between 2 and 3 dimensions, and thinking particularly about cast shadows, and how that was an interesting similarity to extrusion, actually, and being able to draw a line and turn a line into form through extrusion, and a cast shadow is a similar thing. Got particularly obsessed with the blurred edges of cast shadows and thinking about trying to capture some of those qualities of light and shadow in porcelain or in clay, in stuff. And so I was thinking it was trying to make a penumbra, a material penumbra, so a sort of uncertain edge of material, thinking about the boundary of form, which and so I was basically thinking, how do I make clay be half there? Well, you cut half of it away. And when I used to make proper pots with bottoms, throwing a bowl, I'd actually enjoy turning the foot ring a bit more. I sort of like that. I love that transition from plastic clay, from a plastic material to a resistant material. That's just overnight. That's a magical transformation. And I kind of, obviously, I kind of like it in the slightly resistant state. So I just thought turning, so I'll make it be half there, turning. I like turning. I turn half the clay away. How do I do that? I go in every other interval and turn it away. And when I first did it, I thought, well, that's interesting, but it's a bit too simple. I need to do something else to it. And I did various experiments with immersing these things in thick, gloopy glazes and stuff. And then as I looked at what I'd done, I realized that there was incredible complexity in the kind of essentially quite simple and minimalist prospect of making these. And I've now been doing this for about 12 years, and I'm still discovering, as you said, some of the sort of magical properties of it. And still being surprised by the outcomes, which is, after all, what makes the process interesting.
Yep. Bonnie, do you want to tell us what you're doing there?
I've realized my clay is a bit wetter than I'd like. So I'm trying to, while it's drying out so it can stand up by itself, I've put it over a nice recycled tube, just so it starts forming the slight curve that it needs. And I've always got to remember to make sure I don't curve them the same way. So this one's got to flip over. Otherwise, I'll only have one side of a jug. So yeah, I just, while they're drying, sit them over the form, otherwise they start cracking once oh, that's a difference. Yeah, just make sure they don't crack while I'm trying to speed up the drying process.
Do you work on more than one form at a time so they can naturally dry and you don't need the air?
Yeah, normally I've got about 6 on the go. So I leave the slabs out overnight and then come in, cut them all out, and then slowly, the big ones obviously take more time to dry, so I think they're towards the end. So I go size up, do all the bodies, and I attach the bottoms, and then I attach the handles afterwards. So it's like a construction line, just on small scale.
Ah, okay. So I think the question is about your slab mats.
They're new to me as well.
No.
Yeah, when I was asking for materials, I was struggling to find exactly what I use. Normally I've just got a wooden board, and I was stressed about bringing that up. So I saw these online, and it's like a mix between paper and canvas.
Okay.
So it's called a slab mat. A great advert for them now.
And it's absorbent, yeah? They're absorbent?
Yeah, so I did, the first day I was here, I left one on there overnight, and it did buckle. But then I left them again, and they've seemed to have flattened out. So if you do have one, I wouldn't recommend leaving it overnight. But they're quite, it's a bit sturdier than just canvas, and a bit more wibbly-wobbly than board.
It has a very, very fine texture on it.
Yeah. Because that's the other thing, normally when I'm rolling on canvas, like I'm doing now, I'm having to smooth out all the textures because I want a nice smooth surface to work on afterwards.
I've seen these slab mats used with slab rollers. Is that something you
Yeah, it's the
ever
same type
consider?
of thing, yeah. But
You think,
Slab mat.
do you prefer to roll out the slabs by hand, or is it slab roller on your agenda?
in the studio I have access to a slab roller. It's very nice, so I'm no longer the slab roller. I tend to start rolling them out with a slab roller, and I'll leave them, so I've got 2 different thicknesses. I think this is about 10 mil, and then I go down to 6. So I do the final, so like I was saying, when I leave the slabs out overnight, they're a bit thick, and then when I come in the next morning, I give them that final roll. But
Final adjustments by hand.
Yeah, finish it by hand.
Yeah.
I think a question on everybody's mind. How do you make sure it doesn't go through?
There's no hard and fast rule to that. Because I've thrown this thing, and what I tend to do is feel the inside. And I just give it, I kind of feel the thickness of it before I put it on the lathe, so I've got it a bit embedded through my hand into my head. I do sometimes go through. There's some forms that I make that are bowl forms that are wedged onto a wider chuck. And what I do with those is I make a card template of the interior profile first. And then I can just hold that up against it and see if I've got roughly the right curve. With these things where I'm also making a series of objects which are pretty much they're thrown with the same weight of clay to the same dimensions, you get quite a deep knowledge of how far to go. And on the whole, I have a slight tendency to stop too soon. I've very seldom actually gone right through. I have done. And there's some things there's one I've got on the table next door, which if you hold it up to the light, you can see it's probably only a millimetre or 2 thick, the interior at the bottom of some of these flutes. So, yeah. So essentially what I'm doing in terms of where to go to is, the reason I've got this white behind me is so I can see the silhouette of this form. So I'm looking from here. When I'm applying the tool down here, I'm actually looking at the top of the form. So I'm looking at the silhouette I'm creating. I'm not looking at the end of the tool. And that's why I'll probably also sometimes stand back, because by standing back, I can see more fully the whole curve. If I get in close, I can only see into some of these fins, and I can't see over there. So there's a kind of, with the objects in the end, there's a kind of focal distance which matters in your perception of them. So by going dot, 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 I'm drawing a curved line, a curved profile inside.
So you're not looking at the tool end at all?
No, I'm looking here. Just got, yeah.
That's very tacit
Which I've never really
in your hands, isn't it? That's tacit knowledge of
and I've also, the first time I've ever really verbalized that was just now out there. It's something, it's one of those things you do without thinking about it. I have to look here at the tool to make sure I don't miss the groove, but as soon as it's in the groove, I'm looking at the silhouette of the bottom, the groove up at the top of the form.
So Bonnie, do you want to tell us what you're doing there?
I am starting to slip and score. So I score like a hexagon crisscross, and then I'll dry it again just because I like the crispness of the zigzags. Seems to help with my joins. And then you'll see me panic and try and put them together. So you can stop watching at that point.
When you're joining, do you actually use slip? Quite
Yes.
Slip? Yeah.
So I've made a pot of slip there.
Okay.
It's not my slip skills are not amazing, but it works. And when I'm doing the cross-hatching, it actually helps work out where's drier and where's wetter. So when I was down here, I could feel that this section's a bit wetter, so I'll go over that now and try and firm that bit up a bit more than, because this one was more firm.
Yeah. I know this lathe very well because I taught on it from 1995 to 2008, that very lathe, so I know it very well. I know it's from Carmarthen School of Art. Yeah. It's an old Ratcliffe lathe, and it's specifically a plaster lathe. That is a plaster lathe. They're different to wood lathes.
I normally use, I used to own a lathe like this, and I wanted something actually sort of heavier and more stable, so I've got a lathe called a Union Graduate, which you see in a lot of colleges and so on. Floor standing, cast iron, made in Sheffield, I think, in the 70s. But not really transportable to here.
And what's the optimum scale you've worked at with this process in terms of, is there a
so the
cut-off point?
the biggest single forms I make they tend to be like cylindrical or conical forms. And the biggest things I turn in one go start as a bag of, a 12.5 kilo bag of clay, thrown in a way which is really like just coning the clay, getting it centered and making a tall cone, and then with a stick just opening out and then getting that more precise. So I'm throwing something which has got walls which are like a dam side. And that would be sort of this long on the lathe, and would take me 5 hours or so on the lathe, probably, of non-stop. Never stop the lathe once it's going. I can go and have a drink or go, but basically keep the lathe turning, keep going. And that's the limitation of...
Why'd you keep the lathe going?
Because if I stop the lathe for a while and leave it for a bit, you can just get a slight settling.
Okay.
So actually the thing can settle by 1/4 of a millimetre or something, but then it's actually, that reads as a bit of a wobble in it. So you come back to it and it's slightly off-centre and you have to recenter it again. So it is quite fine tolerances. So just keep it spinning and then you're working with it spinning all the time. With these, I call them orbits, these spherical forms, the limitation essentially is what weight these two rings can carry. So once I've turned it down, it's still, the whole weight is sitting on those two rings. And the biggest things that I've done were again, actually, about 10 to 12 kilos of clay thrown into a thick-walled sphere. And those, again, take a long time on the lathe. And the failure rate, as I increase the form by only the size of the form by quite a small rate, the failure rate goes exponentially up because you're asking the weight of that to sit on these rings. So, and basically what happens is near the end of turning this, one of the last things I'll do is turn this foot ring and this neck down, as I'm doing here, to the thickness I want. And so what happens is, having spent 4 or so hours turning all those fins to absolutely perfect, you turn these things down and it cracks, and it goes in the bin.
Oh.
So there's an incentive to not make things too big.
There's a question way up the back. So I'll repeat the question. With the forms that have a different external shape to internal form, do you use a paper to draw that out?
No, so you're thinking of forms, I haven't brought any here, but you might have seen where I'm making sometimes diptychs or triptychs, groups of pieces which are one piece, and sometimes you'll have a cylinder where the internal profile is doing that, is zigzagging. So that cylinder might be made up of 4 or 5 separately thrown and turned pieces that are turned to exactly the same diameter. So if you look at a form like that, each cone, internal cone, is a separately made bit. So one of the ways I achieve scale, which is a kind of historic way of ceramics achieving scale, like bricks for architecture, is by making lots of things and stacking them up and gluing them together. So I make to make like a triptych or something, which might have 12 individual parts glued together into 3 columns, effectively. I'll throw 16 or 18 pieces because I'm going to lose some along the way. Turn them all to exactly the same dimensions, and with that, if I'm doing something which is a cylinder or a cone, I've got essentially a conical taper on the plaster, and I can see the plaster coming out of each end. So that gives me a kind of line to turn to. So I'm just turning to that line that's dictated by the plaster.
Yes, another question. Yeah. The question was, you make it look so easy because you've got to get the torque right, the dryness of the clay, and the speed of the lathe correct. And is that something that you obviously have to arrive at? And how many Parian spheres have you smashed in the process?
Right. It's a really enjoyable process, which is maybe it looks easy, because it's just really fun and physically, sensuously lovely to do. Just the feeling of doing it is really nice. So if I've got a day at the lathe in the studio, it's a day I'm looking forward to. I've also, I've been using this process for over 10 years now, so if I look back at the things that I first showed in 2012, they look excruciatingly shonky, really.
I don't think so, no.
And there is quite a failure rate. I mean, as you'd have realized from me saying, if I want to make a composite object of lots of pieces, I have to allow for that and allow a failure rate. If from wheel to finished exhibitable piece, if I'm getting over 50% success rate, I'm reasonably happy. I mean, it can be really bad. The beginning of this year, I don't know if I was just hungover because it was the beginning of January or something, but I threw 8 pieces like this, each of which was half a bag of clay. And 6 weeks later, I had 1 successful piece to show for it.
Wow.
And in that batch of making, so I make in batches like that, in that batch of making, it was just I don't know, I didn't do anything particularly wrong, but just every little thing that could go wrong did. So the things that can go wrong is you've got the dryness slightly wrong, and on the lathe, and it just cracks at the end. So it can, quite a few things go wrong at the lathe stage. The throwing stage, you don't really make many mistakes. At the lathe stage, then I biscuit fire them, and so when I first made a curved form, I turned them, and then a lot of them cracked, radial cracks on these fins, fine cracks on the sharpest bit of the curve. And I basically realized that it's very difficult to adequately compress the clay as you're throwing it when you're making it that thick. And because of these curved forms, I'm inherently stretching them from the inside. So now what I do with these is, as they're drying, I get them out of a bag every now and then, and I hit them with a stick. So I beat as it's quite hard leather hard, I literally pound it with a stick to compress the external. And that's ironed out that kind of cracking issue. So there's all these things with ceramics where you get a fair way through and something reveals itself as a problem. You have to go right back to the beginning. Because how to deal with cracking is compression. Clay must always be compressed as much as possible.
That's a golden nugget there.
And then I lose some in other stages of firing. The colouring process that I use is a bit technical as well, and that I lose some through the colouring process. But
I'm going to hop onto Bonnie.
Would you tell us at what point you're going to put the base on this, and what you're doing now?
So usually when I cut out my shape, I always roll out more than I need, and I use the scraps of that to. So now that I've performed a magic trick and I've got a jug, well, the body of a jug, I'll pick this up, put it on a scrap, and use that as my template instead, because each shape is always different underneath. So I'm going to roll this. My handles are always thicker, because obviously this has got two lots of slabs put together.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to roll this a bit thinner, and then I'll mess with that shape at the bottom a bit, and then trace the bottom for it, just so I've got the correct shape.
So the shape that you've cut off determines a bit of the profile, and then you freehand the rest of it.
Yeah, this is the one, so the sides and the handle, they've got templates to them, but because some jugs are more skinny, some jugs are quite fat, this is the part that I can't predict, so it's always see what happens when they come out.
Do you ever use coils in your joining, or stitch them at the end? You just push the slip together?
Yeah, I pinch it together and pray. Hope that it stays together, yeah.
And when the base goes on, is that the same? Just slip and...
Yeah, so...
Oh, okay.
So normally I like this to be a bit firmer, but I'm on the clock.
We have a question in the blue T-shirt. Yes, so the question for Nick is, when you stack these pieces together, do you fire them first before you glue them together?
So when I make pieces like that, that tend to be stacked together, they're cylinders or cones, they've all got a very slight sort of flange ring sticking off the end. When they're fired, they're all fired on discs of clay which shrink with them, so they're fired on setters sitting on aluminium to keep them round, as alumina rather than keep them round as they're fired. I get them all out of the kiln. They've also all got slightly varying diameters, top to bottom, so I measure them all right on pencil, the millimeter diameters of each end. Then I match those up so that all those dimensions match. And then I stack them up and I grind down the little ring that's sitting there on I have my wheel convertible to basically a diamond flatbed grinder, grind them down so that the gaps disappear. And then with a Dremel, with a fine diamond burr on the end, give a key to that very smooth ground ring, and then use a very strong epoxy glue to glue them together.
So as you can see,
I've lost track.
Is it, you said about using alumina and a disc, is it alumina disc and then pot?
Oh, so it's a disc of, so it's alumina on the kiln shelf, a disc, just a rolled out disc of Parian. Brushed. That disc is brushed with backwash and dusted with Luminina as well to make sure that nothing sticks to each other, and that the disc shrinks with the piece. And the Luminina between the disc and the kiln shelf is allowing the disc to move over the kiln shelf as it shrinks evenly.
Yes.
Is your finishing mostly done with a sponge then?
Yeah,
Or a
and
kidney? Yeah.
kind of, I've got quite long nails, so I often find that I've jabbed them into my pieces. And when it comes to decorating, that's obviously very annoying. So it's a mix between a sponge, I've got another one in there as well, and a nice old floppy kidney just to really compress it all together.
You're supposed to cut those nails. What is it?
No. But yeah, a lot of this process is just sitting and stroking the jug and trying to make it nice and smooth. So I've cut all my pieces out, but I'm not sure if for this section I might be able to attach them. But it's a big jigsaw. Yeah, I'll hold up. There's my jug. No, but it is already cut out. I'm going to try and attach the bottom now.
Nick, we had a question just about when you were taking the turned form off the lathe, is that a high-risk point of the process? When you finished all this and taking it off the plaster?
So how do I get this off the lathe? Is that the question, essentially?
Yeah, and is it the risky part of a process?
It's, I have lost some there. I don't lose very many. I lose some if I've stuck it on a bit too well. And I have had things where I'm getting it off and it basically half of it comes off and the other half stays on the chuck. But essentially what I do, so I'm just going to keep a marker, because once I get to quite a fine point, unless I go all the way across, I can't see where I've got to. Essentially what I do is I take this off the lathe, the whole chuck with the piece on it, get a piece of wood, I have this in one hand and just knock it on there and it drops off.
So it's just, yeah, knock it off, basically.
I mean, I'm not going to be able to finish this piece, but what I'll do, if you give me like a 2 minutes warning, I'll take it off and show you how I get it off the lathe. Because I'm not going to finish it here. And I have got some other ones with me that I'll turn over the next day and a half.
Another question? Why do you use bags and not drying boxes?
So why do I use
Why do you use bags and not drying boxes?
Oh, I don't know. Someone asked me that last night. I haven't got a good explanation for that. I just
Might be a new.
just use roller bags. It's like,
what you do.
yeah, I think because I'm just taking things in. Yeah, I mean, it would be more efficient. Someone was saying to me last night I should get an old fridge and just have them in an old fridge as a damp store. Yeah, so I can't really hear that because I've got this machine next to me.
You can't hear, sorry. He was just saying that you've had good, you can come about outside. It was just that, yeah, you've had good experience working with drying boxes. That's what I want to tell you.
Thank you.
There you go. A question?
What criteria do you use for putting your handles on your jug shape?
So when I've drawn them out, normally they come with the same handle. I haven't actually tried, because, yeah, so when the template comes, they fit perfectly there. So some handles, they might attach the actual jug themselves, maybe a bit higher. I've got some that, yeah, they all attach slightly different. So if I was to mix it up and kind of jigsaw some more jug shapes together, then I'd have to adapt the template itself and make it specifically for how this has turned out exactly.
Do you do quite a bit of drawing? And because I notice you've got your prepared patterns to go. Is that generally the way you work? You prepare everything in advance?
So I always start with a line drawing, a continuous line drawing, so sometimes they look a bit peculiar. And I then put them through a laser cutter. So I cheat and kind of, instead of using hands, I cut out the shape, and then from that, I kind of work out. And I always do it with paper first to see if it does kind of stick together. And yeah, so it's always from drawing and paper. But now that I've got like a catalogue of shapes that I keep referring to.
Bonnie, just a question. Do you know when you are working on this form, have you predetermined the surface that's going on it, or does that evolve as the piece evolves?
I think some of these, like this one, I'm always trying to, I see it as like a pink jug, so I'm always thinking, oh, this is going to be along those lines. Sometimes I think, oh, I want to make, like down at Remade, I've got a couple Welsh shapes, so I've stuck to those Welsh designs. Well, my interpretation of the Welsh designs there. So sometimes I've got a specific design in mind, sometimes it's how it turns out after it's gone for a bisque that I go, ah, this is going to be this then.
Time for a couple more questions. Anyone? Oh, yep. Middle. Oh, I can't hear you, sorry. Well, will the post stick in the jug when you try and pull it out?
Sorry, what?
Will the post inside the jug, will it stick when you try and pull it out?
No. So I'm continually kind of like twisting it to make sure it's not sticking. And when I know that it's firm enough to not need the support, then I'm just taking it out anyway. So maybe in a couple hours I'll have taken that out and the handle will be attached by that point.
Been there, done that.
Sad.
This is what we come to see, really.
Yeah.
This is definitely going to
We
be a
all
wobbly
love the
jug.
This
jeopardy,
is what we come to
really.
see. Because it happens to all of us.
Yep. Could we have a little rundown, Nick, of the process after the bisque firing for you and the colours and whatnot?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
are you saving that for tomorrow?
I'm using soluble metal salts to colour these, which was an idea that came to me through a series of sort of monoprint drawings that I make, which are a kind of parallel making activity, thinking about some of the same ideas in a different medium. The pieces are biscuit fired. I'm putting soluble metal salts into them and then using a process involving saturation and evaporation to concentrate the colour on the edges.
If you're in your studio, you have all sorts of tools you can reach.
Yeah, I've got so many props.
I haven't got it here.
I only brought a selection.
Yeah, laying things on a bit of foam or...
Yeah.
And
bit of
one
support.
final question
That works.
before we wrap up this session?
Yay.
Yep, right at the front. Do any of the ribs warp in the biscuit firing, Nick?
Sorry?
Do any of your ribs warp in the biscuit firing?
They don't warp in the biscuit firing. I do get on the vitrification firing, particularly when things are, there's some long fins, I really like it actually, a sort of ripple in those fins and a sort of wobble in them. So it's a little bit of kind of material pushback at the precision of the making, where, you know, the heat and the pyroplasticity just very subtly start to push back at me. Yeah. What I'll do is I'll stop and take this off the lathe so you see how it comes off.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing to say is it probably looks like I've got most of the way through that. I mean, but I think probably the last 5% of the clay removal, 5 to 10% of the clay removal probably takes about half the time. So the level of, you know, there's quite an intensity to the level of refinement that I tend to probably push further and further. So as I was saying already, if I'm going along it, I need to keep going all the way to the end because I can't see where I've gone. And once I've done another 10 passes on that or something to really sharpen it up, you really can't see where you've gone, but it then shows in the finished object. So that final, 5% or so of the making takes a lot of the time and makes a lot of the difference to the perception of the final form. You can see now, particularly when it stops, it looks much cruder than when it's moving, yeah? So it's quite frayed, the edges are quite frayed, these rings are rough, but I'll turn those more precisely as they get nearer the end. And then when it's completely bone dry, I will sponge the edges of the fins. But it has to be totally bone dry to do it. If you do it leather hard, they all crack, which is kind of counterintuitive, but...
That lovely camera work.
So we get it off, just like that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you, everyone, for your participation in this session, and we'll see you after lunch.